Channel 404. Though South Africa has some of the most sophisticated credit regulations in the world, banking experts and analysts are concerned that the country's regulatory institutions may not have the capacity to enforce them. African banks' debacle could have a negative impact on the cost of funds for other unsecured lenders trying to raise capital for their lending operations. Moody says it expects a challenging operating environment in South Africa's unsecured lending market. This on the back of subdued economic growth and the labour unrest in certain sectors.
Ratings agency Moody's downgraded 4 South African banks on Tuesday and put them on review for further cuts, saying there was a lower likelihood of support from the central bank to protect creditors after African banks' debt crisis. African Bank has gone under due to unsecured lending, while Capitec faces similar woes, being put under the same umbrella as African Bank Investment Limited. This comes after Moody cited concerns about its exposure to risky loans, the same loans that brought African Bank to its knees. South Africa's central bank also said in response to the downgrade that it did not agree with the reasons given by Moody's.
I think that rating agencies act independently and do an analysis and assessment of the country or of the institution and put out their views. In this particular instance, around the response by Moody's to the downgrade of Capitec and then the big 4 banks, in our view, their reasoning for it is in our view, incorrect.
Analysts believe African banks' debacle that led to a downgrade of the big 4 will lead to tighter lending regulations.
We see more stringent rules being applied by the banks themselves. It will be tougher for people to get access to funding going forward, in my view, as banks will want to tighten their potential to lose money if they lend to John Dube out there who cannot manage to pay back the monies. So there has to be an increase in the regulation, in our view.
Joining us now to discuss this further is Magauta Mpahlele, the CEO of the National Debt Mediation Association. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Magauta, the indebtedness of South African consumers is something that can't be ignored. Why are South Africans living beyond their means?
Well, it's a complex issue, really. If you look at our economy, it's not growing very well. It's losing jobs. A lot of people are being retrenched. A lot of people who depend on commission, that is being reduced. And what we've seen in terms of lending is that the lending is to the full capacity of the disposable income of the consumer. So it means that if something happens to them, they do not have the capacity to handle the change in terms of their income. So when something happens, really they get into trouble.
Now, part of your mandate as an association is to ensure and to contribute, to the healthy provision of credit and to also help consumers who are struggling to manage their finances. How are you as an association going about reaching this mandate?
Well, for a few years, we've been raising concerns about how lending is being done, especially in the unsecured lending space, because we have been seeing that the affordability criteria that is being applied by the banks, by other microlenders or all other lending institutions is not right. It's not taking into consideration that consumers at the end of the day would have difficulty servicing the debt. So we've been saying from a policy perspective, the rules need to be changed and everybody needs to play by the same rules, because currently each credit provider can apply its own affordability criteria. We've been seeing recently the National Credit Regulator finding against credit providers who are not verifying income, who are not checking the living expenses that are being declared by the consumer. So there is under-declaration, which means that the consumer at the end of the day is actually taking something that they cannot afford at the end of the day.
Speaking of under-declaration, because I think that's the main problem when it comes to people not being able to repay their loans. Would you say that banks are simply just ignoring that because they just want to give out as much as they can in the hope that consumers will pay back? How do they address that issue of a consumer applying and actually going through the process of checking if they can afford it?
Well, we think there should be some norms that are applied across the industry. If you're a household of 3 and 4 people and you go to a bank and say, my grocery is 1,000 rand, somebody should ask the question and say, that does not make sense. But currently our law says that it's up to the consumer to be truthful in their disclosure, which means that the credit provider will say that is what the consumer told me, and they do not take responsibility for that under declaration. And because some of the, the people that do the applications, they are paid on how much they sell. So they encourage consumers to under-declare, or consumers themselves, because they want the loan, they under-declare, and, it's not in their best interest at all.
Now, earlier on, we asked our viewers what their views are on this debt issue, and I want to go through some of those tweets with you that they sent to us. Mangaliso says, I think whether we encourage it or not, it's still going to happen. This is unsecured lending, but I do think that there should be awareness. And then we've got Tato, who says, yes, we need credit on some other items like houses, cars, etc. But one needs to be responsible for that credit. And yes, we need to save. Nelson says, we should encourage to change mindsets and teach people to save. Credit offers downfall unexpectedly. D says, if anything, it should be discouraged. It delays progress. And just the last one, and this one is also questioned, is from Linda, who says, do you think as an African bank customer I should take my money and run and never look back? What's your perspective on that?
Well, if you owe money to African bank, you have to continue paying it, because the consequences of paying would still follow. As we've heard from the Reserve Bank, it's business as usual, so the responsibility to pay remains.
Now, speaking on African Bank, because that's the big story, of the week. Recently, they've been in the papers a lot and in the news a lot for unsecured lending. Would you say, if we use them as an example, would you say they've been irresponsible when it comes to the lending space?
I think to some extent, their business model clearly did not work. They did not make enough provision for bad debts, and I think they read the environment incorrectly. Because currently, like we're saying, a lot of consumers are under stress. They are not able to pay their debts, and I think African Bank just misread the whole situation.
Now, as the National Debt Mediation Association, you know a lot about managing debts and managing credit. What can we as consumers do today to start clearing our debts?
I think the best thing for consumers to do is to do their own affordability assessment. You need to determine for yourself how much you can afford, and you need to increase. And also look at the products that you are taking. A lot of consumers are taking bad products. They don't understand the different types of loans, how much it costs, where can you cut? Like now, next month there might be another interest rate increase. Sit down with your family. We don't discuss our finances. A lot of
increasing into our adult lives, and later on, when you have a family and you continue to live that life of not being able to afford anything.
Well, we have that car, you want that television, you want that couch. You don't sit down and do your homework, and looking at your budget, looking at your affordability for the right things. So when all these things come together, so look at all of those things, sit down and do proper planning. and make sure that you are not, they don't care. So you have to take responsibility. We can blame credit providers, but at the end of the day, you have to do the work yourself. That are registered with the National Credit Regulator, and people can check whether they are registered or not. That counseling is one option. There are other unpaid debt that you cannot afford. It all boils down to individual responsibility.
Now, just